Hi, I'm Greg Braun, Executive Director of the Guardians of Martin County, and welcome to this next episode in our series of podcasts. This is a new excursion for the Guardians, but we've got a whole series of podcasts set up, one per month for the rest of this year, 2024. We're going to be talking about various issues of interest and concerns on the environmental side in Martin County. With me today is Eve Samples. Thanks for making the time for us.
Happy to be here.
Eve is the executive director of the Friends of the Everglades, one of the organizations that we partner with on water issues. And today we're at the St Lucie Locks, the location along the C-44 or South Fork of the St Lucie River that connects from Lake Okeechobee to the west to the St Lucie River to the east. We selected this site because it's a key location as far as water issues in Martin County. The St Lucie Canal was constructed back in the 1920s, in part to allow transportation across the state rather than boats that would need to go all the way around past the Keys and up the East Coast. But one of the unintended consequences for that has been that it provides an outlet or discharge from Lake Okeechobee waters. And so the reason that we want Eve to be with us today is to talk about the connection between Martin County and the Everglades. This area also includes Phipps Park, a county-owned property a little bit to the east of us, where the county has constructed a Stormwater Treatment Area, also known as an STA. And so we're going to ask Eve to talk a little bit about STAs overall, but also a key one down in the area south of Lake Okeechobee called the Everglades Agricultural Area. So although the Guardians are primarily focused on growth management kinds of things, the health of our waters is certainly critical to the quality of life in Martin County. So Eve, let's start off and talk to us a little bit about what the connection is between Martin County and the Everglades and also the Friends of the Everglades.
Thanks, Greg. So Friends of the Everglades was founded in 1969 by Marjorie Stoneman Douglas in Miami. And Marjorie Stoneman Douglas was well known for writing the book, The Everglades River of Grass, which was published in 1947 and really redefined the world's view, at least outside of Native American tribes, of the Everglades as a swampy wasteland to be reclaimed to a national or even international treasure. And I say outside of Native American tribes because I think Native tribes already realized what a treasure it was. So we were in Miami for 50 years, and back in 2019, after several lost summers on the St Lucie River and toxic algae blooms, Friends of the Everglades moved to Stewart in part to focus more on the northern end of the system. Some people think of the Everglades as just Everglades National Park, but really the greater Everglades spans the region from north of Orlando, the Kissimmee River Valley, Lake Okeechobee, east to the St Lucie River, west to the Caloosahatchee, and then down south to the southern Everglades and even Florida Bay. So it's almost the southern half of Florida, maybe even a little bit more than that. And Stewart and the St Lucie River, Martin County, has received the brunt of the abuse of the Everglades drainage for many years. Other parts certainly have suffered too, but we're here because there's one solution to all of this, and that's reconnecting the slow southern flow of clean water from Lake Okeechobee to the southern Everglades so we don't get blasted here in Martin County. It's a really important part of the ecosystem, and we're honored to be headquartered here in Stewart now. Martin County, because of the foresight of voters in Martin County and the long legacy of conservation, we have conserved so many of our natural lands here. So really you can see what the Everglades ecosystem, which is diverse within itself. There are many different habitats within the Everglades ecosystem. You can see what it looked like in close to its original state here in Martin County, in some ways more than you can in other parts of the system to the south.
Mm-hmm. So we think about the Atlantic Ridge ecosystem, and I suppose maybe the eastern, like 10% of the county or so has a drainage way that goes towards the east, but maybe the whole western part, western 2/3 of the county historically had been part of the Everglades system.
Right. And that's why this connection, this artificial connection we have from Lake Okeechobee through the C-44 Canal, also known as the St Lucie Canal, out to the St Lucie River is so damaging because historically water did not flow this way from the lake to the St Lucie River. And that would have been damaging a long time ago, and it's even more damaging now because Lake Okeechobee is so polluted with phosphorus and nitrogen, and that's what leads to these horrible algae blooms that unfortunately we've come to see every year on Lake Okeechobee. The question is always whether the floodgates will be opened from Lake Okeechobee to the St Lucie River and whether we'll bear the brunt of it where we live in Stewart.
Yeah, so you've mentioned those lakes up north of Lake Okeechobee, and I've certainly heard the phrase, the chain of lakes. So is water essentially coming from the headwaters up there around the southern part of Orlando? Do we actually get some of that into our area?
Yes, so Shingle Creek area, the Kissimmee chain of lakes, through the Kissimmee River down into Lake Okeechobee is the way the water starts at the north end of the system and eventually makes its way into Lake Okeechobee. And when the floodgates are opened at Port Mayaca, that's known as the S308 gates, and then open right here where we're sitting at the St. Lucie Lock and Dam, S80, then yes, some of that water from the north can make its way here. The Kissimmee River, unfortunately, through another bad engineering decision, was channelized decades ago in Florida. And fortunately, almost as soon as that channelization was done, leaders in the state of Florida recognized the damage it caused because it caused those floodplains to just rush into the waterways with pollutants and then rush into the Lake Okeechobee. So the Army Corps of Engineers, one of the better things it's done is to restore the oxbows in about 40 miles of the Kissimmee River, slowing down the flow of water. It's not fully restored, but that was an example of where we went wrong and then undid what damage man had done. That's a great Ernie Lyons quote I love. Ernie Lyons was a late great editor of the Stewart News, and he said, "What men do, they can undo." And I do think that's true, and I think about it a lot in the Everglades.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. One of my father's quotes was, "Don't break what you can't fix."
That's an even better motto. Don't break it in the first place.
That's right, yeah. Okay, so water from the Orlando area coming south wouldn't necessarily be bad, but what's the whole situation with algae blooms in Lake Okeechobee and what's causing those?
So Lake Okeechobee is a massive lake, one of the largest freshwater lakes in North America, and it is incredibly polluted with phosphorus and nitrogen. And while the urban areas of Orlando are contributors, we know that the vast majority of the inflow into Lake Okeechobee, about 80%, is from agriculture north of the lake. So we have large agricultural basins that feed into the Kissimmee River, and then nitrogen flows into Lake Okeechobee from there. There is a bit of back pumping that occurs from the sugarcane fields south of the lake. That used to be a much, much bigger problem. Now we have other problems with the sugar industry that I'm sure we'll talk about, but the vast majority of the inflow of phosphorus and nitrogen into the lake comes from those inputs north, agriculture. And it's a problem because that's how algae blooms grow. That's their food, especially nitrogen. So when we see cyanobacteria, blue-green algae on Lake Okeechobee, and frequently during the hot summer months, we see most of the lake, it's a 730 square mile lake. We see most of the lake covered with algae blooms, and they're fed by these inputs, these pollutants.
Mm-hmm. And the blooms, not only the pollutants fuel them, but the higher temperatures during the summer.
Yes.
That's also what causes them.
It's become known as algae season unofficially, and often now we're seeing these blooms pop up during the spring months even. It's not just the summer. Last year near the Pahokee Marina, there was a bloom in the spring that burned itself out. When they consume all the available pollutants as fuel, they can burn themselves out. Then it's just a question of whether more phosphorus and nitrogen become available. So yeah, the warm months are the difficult months here, and especially difficult when they coincide with a high lake level, which is what we're looking at right now, unfortunately.
Right, yeah. So Martin County currently has a population of, I don't know, 160,000 or something like that. Probably the vast majority of those never go west of I-95 or the Turnpike. If people aren't familiar with the St. Lucie Canal and Lake Okeechobee, how would they get there and kind of get a firsthand view of the magnitude of the lake?
Sure. So I think where we're sitting right now is a great place for anyone who lives in Martin County to visit. This is Phipps Park, as you mentioned, and the St. Lucie Lock and Dam. This is the connection between the artificially dredged canal and the natural river. And then if you want to see the connection between the canal and Lake Okeechobee, you'd go out to Port Mayaca and you'd drive out past Indiantown. And
On
there's
Canner Highway.
On Canner Highway, that's right. And there's a little park there, and you can go up to the top of the Herbert Hoover Dike because, you can't see Lake Okeechobee from sea level or ground level outside of that, but you can drive up on top of the dike and you'll see Lake Okeechobee spanning to the horizon because it's such a massive lake. And you'll also see those structures there, the Port Mayaca Lock and Dam, or S308. So when those gates open, we really face a challenge here in the community. Worth a look. These are engineering marvels created by the Army Corps of Engineers. Unfortunately, they work against nature too often.
Yeah, and although it's a little bit drizzly out today, we're lucky that we have not had so much rain that the Corps of Engineers has needed to open the locks. But the structures that we see behind us are the spillway structures. To the left of the little white building there is the actual lock that boats can move through. But have you been down here at times when these spillway gates are open?
I have. It's noisy. You and I would have a hard time carrying on this conversation now when the spillways are wide open and hundreds of billions of gallons of water can be transmitted through these gates over time. I'd say a bad day at these gates is 1,000 cubic feet a second through the gates, and a cubic foot is, picture a football of water. So 1,000 footballs of polluted water coming through. 1 cubic foot is one football. Okay. So if you have 1,000 footballs of water per second coming through these gates, it's just a massive velocity. And we've been up way higher than that, higher than 1,000 cubic feet at 2,000, 3,000. At times it's been much higher. So the volumes of water that the Army Corps believes it has to release to lower Lake Okeechobee in the name of flood protection are really massive and damaging to this estuary, again, because of the pollutants and because we don't need that much fresh water at once. The St. Lucie estuary is a brackish estuary. It needs a balance of fresh water and salt water.
Right. So in a future podcast, we are going to be talking with Mark Perry about that delicate balance and what oysters need. Right. And unfortunately, the sort of routine die-offs that the oysters in the South Fork of the St. Lucie have. Right. But let's get back to the Friends of the Everglades and the water issues related to the lake that affect the Everglades. Am I right that one of the impacts of that is that the higher nutrient water that's being discharged into the Everglades actually causes a shift from sawgrass to cattails?
That's exactly right. And Friends of the Everglades was engaged in Clean Water Act litigation years ago related to that imbalance. Water quality is a major priority of ours. It has been since our founding by Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. So the state of Florida was not meeting court-ordered water quality standards for phosphorus flowing south to the Everglades. Friends of the Everglades and the Miccosukee tribe actually recognizing that ended up joining together in court and forcing the state of Florida to comply to meet those standards. So now there's this 10 parts per billion of phosphorus standard the state of Florida has to meet, and there are deadlines coming up. And it led to construction of more stormwater treatment areas, which are man-made marshes that clean the water before it moves south. So we're watching that very closely as these deadlines are looming. 2025, 26, 27 are going to be really important years to see if the state-built stormwater treatment areas, there are about 60,000 acres of those south of the lake, if they're getting the job done in terms of water flowing south to the Everglades. Because if they're not, then we see these monocultures of cattail that displace the natural environment of the Everglades, and it's incredibly damaging.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you mentioned that threshold of 10 parts per billion. It's hard for me to even fathom what that concentration would relate to. Can you have an explanation?
Yeah, it's a very, very small amount of phosphorus that the Everglades can tolerate. It is not a phosphorus tolerant system, and it has been forced to take on phosphorus because there's about 500,000 acres of sugarcane. There's some other farming south of the lake too, but it is mostly sugarcane that runs off into now stormwater treatment areas, but previously untreated into the Everglades. So the Everglades really can't tolerate this phosphorus, and it's critical that water be cleaned and meet water quality standards before it gets south to the Everglades. There are two parts, actually three, to Everglades restoration. That's kind of the holy trinity of Everglades restoration. So there's getting the water quality right, getting the water quantity right, and also the timing of water delivery, because you don't want an influx of water when it shouldn't be there either. The Everglades was built by Mother Nature around these hydro periods. Wetlands expand and shrink with the seasons, and we have to have the right timing too.
Yeah. Okay. So you've mentioned stormwater treatment areas a couple times, and certainly the South Florida Water Management District has needed to take the lead on constructing and operating those. But tell us a little bit about who's paying for those, how are they designed and managed?
Yes. So I've been able to go out to the stormwater treatment areas and really get a sense of the challenges inherent in operating with them. I went out with the South Florida Water Management District a few years ago, actually when Maggie Herchala was still alive. I got to go out there with her. And these are man-made marshes. And when we were there were Water Management District workers and waiters hand planting vegetation in the water. Bulrush is one of the plants that they use to clean the water. So I just share that because it gives you a picture of how labor intensive it is to manage these things, to re-engineer the system back to what Mother Nature intended. So you have these marshes and you want a slow flow of water through them so that the marsh vegetation can take up the phosphorus, the pollutants. Right now, there are about 60,000 acres operated by the South Florida Water Management District. They've cost about $2 billion to construct. Taxpayers have paid those costs. And then on top of that, they cost about $22 million a year to operate. Taxpayers at large pay half of that. So if you live in the 16 counties of the Water Management District, you have a line on your property tax bill for the district. And then the other half of that comes from the agricultural privilege tax, which is largely borne by those sugar growers south of the lake. Unfortunately, that's going to be sunsetting in the coming years. So there's a big question about what will make up for that other half of the operations. These things are big and expensive to manage, but they're arguably the best thing we've done for Everglades restoration because they so closely mimic what Mother Nature designed. And they're very different than the big, tall reservoirs that we also see.
Mm-hmm. So if the water that's being treated in those SDAs is certainly some of it coming from agricultural areas, is any of it coming from the urbanized East Coast?
No, but it's a really important question about where that water comes from. So it's mostly the Everglades agricultural area south of the lake going into the SDAs. Every year, the district tracks how much Lake Okeechobee water goes south into those STAs, and I'd say about 10% would be a typical year, 10% Lake Okeechobee water, the rest coming from mostly the EAA, about 500,000 acres of sugarcane.
The EAA?
Everglades agricultural area. Sorry, Everglades restoration is rife with acronyms, so stop me to explain those. So we need more Lake Okeechobee water going south, being cleaned, and ultimately flowing down to the southern Everglades, Everglades National Park, and Florida Bay, ultimately. So because that's good for the system, first of all, but also so that we're not getting blasted east to the St Lucie River when the lake is too high and west to the Caloosahatchee River. So more clean water flowing south, being cleaned, which is really important because of that water quality component, at the right times of year is also the solution for us here in Martin County, where we're getting these unnatural, totally untreated discharges, by the way. There's a court order about phosphorus limits to the south, and we have no water quality protections on water flowing from Lake Okeechobee into the St Lucie River.
That doesn't seem right.
No, it's not. It's terrible, and it's not only an environmental concern, it's a public health concern because we know blue-green algae, cyanobacteria blooms are linked to neurodegenerative diseases like ALS and Parkinson's, really scary stuff, and also liver disease and respiratory ailments. So it's a public health concern, and it's an economic concern. Of course, we're really water-dependent economy here in Martin County.
Well, thanks for explaining STAs. And during a future podcast, we're going to be visiting some of the STAs here in Martin County with the folks from Martin County's Public Utilities Department. So we'll get to see some of that in real life. But if people, I've encouraged them to go out and see Lake Okeechobee. If they wanted to see one of the Water Management District's STAs, are any of them open to the public?
Yes, you can go out and access the STAs. They're actually pretty popular among outdoors recreators. There's some hunting allowed. So go to the Water Management District website and check out the STA section to see where the public access points are. And perhaps the district would accommodate a public tour sometime, kind of like the one I took all those years ago with Maggie Hirschall. It's really eye-opening to see what the work they're doing. And a lot of it is good. Unfortunately, those STAs are largely serving the sugarcane fields, not Lake Okeechobee and our kind of broader public interests right now.
Yeah. Okay. Isn't there an STA, a relatively small one, up in northwestern Martin County?
Yes. So I believe you're referring to the C44 Reservoir STA. Is that the one you're talking about?
We'll talk about that one also. Okay. But then there's another one that's real popular for birders.
Okay. You tell me about that then.
I don't know the details, but I know that the local Audubon chapter has organized a number of trips out there. So it's on the eastern shore of Lake Okeechobee, and it is accessible. And so we'll encourage people to go out there and see their birds. But you've referred to the C44 Reservoir and STA, and certainly there's been a lot of media coverage of that recently, as it's been under construction for a couple of years. And tell us a little bit about what that is designed to do. It's a massive structure.
It is. So Comprehensive Everglades Restoration, the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Project, or CERP, has 68 components. This was authorized by Congress back in 2000. Bill Clinton signed it into law with Jeb Bush at his side as the 2000 election was being debated by the Supreme Court or considered by the Supreme Court. So bipartisan support back then. And one of the 68 components was this C44 Reservoir and Stormwater Treatment Area. And it was among the first CERP projects to be rolled out and implemented. It's not designed to deal with our Lake Okeechobee water issue that we've been talking about. It's designed to deal with the basin of land that is between the lake and the urban area in Martin County. So water from that basin is treated in the STA and taken into the reservoir. So it is online now. It came online about a year ago, a little bit more perhaps. And unfortunately, it hasn't been holding as much water as was anticipated. The Army Corps of Engineers has talked about some seepage issues there. So we're watching that closely. I think the media coverage has been good and important because this big reservoir, it's thousands of acres, is kind of a litmus test for some of the other big reservoirs that are part of CERP and Everglades restoration. They're unlike anything that have been built, certainly in Florida and arguably on the planet. In fact, Everglades restoration is the most complex ecosystem restoration project on the planet. So we need to watch the C44 Reservoir project closely to make sure we get it right so that we can be very tuned into what's happening with a couple of other big reservoirs in the pipeline.
Yeah, okay. So you mentioned the planting of the bulrush and the ability for those plants to uptake the nutrients. But what happens after that? Certainly they have limited capacity, or do they get mined, or what happens?
That's right. So STAs do not have an unlimited lifespan. The vegetation die off, then it can contribute to more nutrients. So they're constantly tended to by the Water Management District. That's why it costs $22 million a year to operate them. You've got to make sure that the vegetation is in good order, that the water velocity is not too great or too low, water levels in general. So it's really a complicated and important undertaking and hard to get it right.
Yeah, well, we'll hope that once that facility comes fully online, it will indeed deal with a lot of the pollutants that are generated within our basin.
Right. And there are two things. So there's the STA component of the C44 reservoir. That's the kidneys, think of it, right? It's the cleaning capacity. And then there's the reservoir. That's the water holding. So these reservoirs have tall walls, and you can imagine the water pressure created inside them. And that's why things like seepage become a concern.
Right. So several years ago, there was a lot of discussion about the reservoir and STA, the sizes of them for the Everglades agricultural area. So give us an update sort of on the status of that. Has that been constructed, or is it operational? What's the time frame?
It's under construction. So anyone who was in Martin County during the last summer of 2013 or 2016 or 2018 will remember that there was a lot of talk about buying land south of Lake Okeechobee to create more capacity to store and clean water so it can go south to the Everglades as originally intended in the River of Grass. So back when Joe Negron was Senate president, being from Stewart, he led a charge to pass Senate Bill 10, which accelerated plans for the Everglades Agricultural Area Reservoir, the EAA Reservoir. Originally, that project was envisioned for 60,000 acres, and because of the sausage making that happens in Tallahassee, it ended up being shrunken down to 16,500 acres. That's both the reservoir and the stormwater treatment area. So what happens when you have a much smaller footprint? You build a much taller reservoir, or at least that's what the Water Management District and the Army Corps decided on. So this EAA reservoir, which is under construction now, will have 37-foot high embankment walls. That's taller than the Herbert Hoover Dike around Lake Okeechobee. So not like anything seen in nature. And Friends of the Everglades has repeatedly gone on the record with concerns about the water quality component, the STA that's attached to it, that kidney that needs to treat the water that's stored before it can move south, because the STA is only going to be about 6,500 acres. It sounds big, but when you have a 10,000-acre reservoir, 37-foot high embankment walls, that's a lot of water to deal with. So we've worked with scientists, and also the National Academy of Scientists have put a spotlight on looming water quality issues, because we've got to meet those court-ordered phosphorus limits on water moving south. So there's a question about whether the EAA reservoir and its adjacent stormwater treatment area will get the job done. Really, really important. It's a $4 billion project now. So really important, not just for the environment, but for taxpayers, that we get this right.
Yeah, well, thanks for explaining all that to us. It's a very complex subject. In the minutes that we've got left, I'd like to hear more about the Friends of the Everglades. Are you indeed a membership organization? Do you have meetings? How can we find out more information about you?
Thanks for asking that. So we make it very easy for people to become Friends of the Everglades. All you have to do is sign up to get our emails at everglades.org. And if you want to elevate your support from there, we have a group called Marjorie's Circle, named after our founder, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, where people can deepen their support. If you sign up for our emails, we will make sure that you stay informed on things like the EAA reservoir. We also have a pretty robust legislative accountability effort going on now, because bills that are filed in Tallahassee have direct impacts on all of these water quality and quantity issues we're talking about. So session just kicked off about a week ago, and we're tuned into that. So yes, we welcome anyone who'd love to support Friends of the Everglades to go to everglades.org. We have a lot of support, not just here in Florida, but around the country and even some abroad.
Yeah, well, I was pleased to hear the presentation yesterday by Gil Smart at the Rivers Coalition meeting. So we're glad that the Friends of the Everglades are part of that. And tell me how Gil's work and the legislative session fit in with your mission?
Sure. So Gil wears two hats. He is our policy director at Friends of the Everglades. And then he is also separately executive director of an organization called Vote Water. Vote Water is a 501c4. It can recommend candidates at election time. It can put out voter guides. And that's something Friends of the Everglades cannot do. We're a 501c3. And as a 501c3 nonprofit, we stay out of electoral politics. But we recognize that some of these issues require political solutions. So we are a sister organization of Vote Water, and we keep all those buckets very separate and have good lawyers who advise us on how to do that. But we see the need for both of these organizations.
Great. And I also heard that you've got some sort of a scholarship program.
That's right. We just last year launched the Karen Mashburn Environmental Scholars Program, named after one of our late board members. And her husband has contributed $10,000 a year toward a scholarship that goes to one recipient, really generous program. So it can be an undergraduate student or even a rising undergraduate who just graduated from high school, or a graduate student. And they receive this scholarship and they do a fall internship with us for our Young Friends of the Everglades program. That's our youth education program. We had a wonderful intern and scholarship recipient last year named Autumn Bryan. And we are actively accepting applications for our next scholar right now. So go to everglades.org for more info on that.
Great. Well, thank you. And we're running out of time now, but we appreciate the time that you spent with us, even on this rainy day. But tune in to future podcasts. The next one, we're going to feature Mark Perry and the Florida Oceanographic Society, their work on behalf of water quality, oysters, and the health of the Indian River Lagoon. So thanks, Eve.
Thanks, Greg. Take care.